Well, hello there, and welcome back, my friends, to another beautiful day. Another attempt to express things that are ineffable, unexplainable, and I always get stumped when I talk about certain subjects. There are some topics that I can make a video about and just go on and on, just especially things that, I find interesting or important in life. And often things that even I can't really know the full breadth of, the full scope of any situation is impossible for any one of us to understand. It's just like understanding another person. We make assumptions about people based on certain things we've heard or one thing they did. We make assumptions about, certain career paths or certain brand names or whatever it may be, merely because it's more comfortable for us to have absolutes, to believe that we can make up our mind and, yes, I believe this is true, and no, this over here is not true. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the belief of God. Even that term has become so tainted and twisted that a lot of people don't want to use it. And in fact, up till a few years ago, I found myself refraining from using it unless it was in some context of degrading a different person's version of God. And looking back on my youth and my resistance to religion, it's not that I was opposed to the idea of something greater. In fact, at a very young age, well, I would say relatively, when I was a teenager, I had some experiences that led me to believe that there was a higher power, that there is something more intelligent than us that is beyond the scope of our understanding and always will be, something that touches us in a certain way, to where the only way to explain it, other than saying it's all a delusion or something we've manifested in our mind, is to say, well, maybe that was an external realization. Maybe my mind discovered something, yet not convincing enough to say this is fact and this is how things are. But after decades of bouncing these ideas off of other people and hearing people speak about their experiences with what you might call a higher power, I've reached the conclusion that they weren't mistakes, that they're not errors in judgment or delusions. When I was younger, I wasn't taught about religion. My family didn't talk about God, beliefs. They weren't atheists, they weren't religious, they were just people. And I'll never know the deepest beliefs that either of my parents had. My father, I know his parents, I think, were Christians, and then they joined the LDS church, I believe. Yeah, for a while, but my dad never took on any of that. And he died when I was young, 14, so I didn't really get the full, discussion with him. And talking to your father about his beliefs is, of course, the first step for any child, to say what is out there. And are we just here for no reason whatsoever? Is there a purpose? Is there some deeper meaning behind life? So when I reached my 20s, I kind of told myself, okay, well, I'm going to set these things on the back shelf and I will let them ferment and see what comes of it. And I continually was reminded that the universe is a very, very vast place, yet it's all within all of us, that we are all part of the whole. Whether you believe in creation or you believe in the Big Bang, everything came from that little point of light. Even in the scientific belief that we are all stardust. And I think that's really hard for humans to grasp, to understand how we got here, and these few big questions. Who are we? Why are we? And how can we be sure? What should we be doing? And that's the only question that I've ever really wanted to pose to any God that may be out there. But having several discussions about this with people over the years, I've often been chastised and put down because I don't believe exactly what they believe. And this dogma that, I was going to say infiltrates, but really it contaminates all mainstream religions. Yeah, even down to Buddhism. The idea that you go into monk mode and that you're going to find enlightenment and find your own truth. That doesn't work in service to the people. And there's a certain type of person who only lives to serve others. And then there's a certain type of person who only lives to serve themselves. And 99.9% of us are somewhere in the middle. That we feel, whatever we might believe, that it's our duty as human beings to help one another and to care about other people. And when that truth comes into question, from us personally, it leads to a lot of confusion. It's not just religion and dogma that has caused the problems and caused many people to turn away from God, but the current, I don't want to call it New Age, because it's not New Age spirituality, it's Old Age. It's the same shit that's been there from the beginning. It's the same crap from the 1800s, 1900s, Mary Baker Eddy and, science, Christian Science, all the way to golden underwear, magic underwear and Mormonism. These little systems of procedures and practices and rituals, which are so important to all of us. Rituals are extremely important. I mean, one example would be a coming of age ritual, especially for boys when they reach a certain age, whether they go on a vision quest or dance around a fire or just get introduced to some very complicated topics. Going through some sort of a ritual. I mean, in Judaism, it's a bar mitzvah. And many cultures have their own various rituals. In one African tribe, you put your hand into a mitt with a bunch of bullet ants woven into that mitt. And you're supposed to keep your hand in there as long as you can. You can pull it out anytime you want. Why don't they? Because you want to prove to your tribe that you're strong enough to handle what's coming. And they're not likely to ever be exposed to that many ant bites. It's not like they're, building up a tolerance or resistance to this. It's just, can you handle the pain? Because you're going to deal with a lot in your life. And some of the pain I've been through in my life, with my sciatica, toothaches, things like this, that make you wonder, what kind of a God would create a universe where people suffer? And this is often the biggest hang-up, because people are assuming that God is some being that is just creating Earth and then standing by to watch, people live and die. If you take God and you expand God into everything, and you can call it whatever you like, there are many different terms for it, but it's not just pantheism or, it's so much deeper. It's an understanding that comes straight from your gut, right from the heart. And sometimes we need to be nudged in the right direction in order to find that. Our brains are designed, or we design our brains, rather. We program our brains through society and our life to be able to cope with the stresses that have been put upon us. And this morphs every generation with the new realizations we have. The problems of an 18th century kid are totally different from the problems of a 20th century kid. We have, problems with screen addiction, for example. But decades ago, we heard the same thing about television. When radio came out, people thought everyone was just going to listen to the radio all the time. Hell, there was an article I read from the 1920s about how everybody's sitting around together but reading their own newspapers. There was even a time when the written word was considered profane and only for certain people. As long as there have been belief systems, there have been people there to try to control them. So the origins of Christianity, the origins of Judaism, the origins of any of these belief systems, many of them can be traced back to Zoroastrianism, which is fascinating in its own right. However, upon closer investigation, you find that many of their practices and rituals are very dogmatic as well. not so much as others, but people want solid answers. And anytime there's an open-ended question, it doesn't work for most people. And a great example would be comparing Christianity to, say, Zen, Buddhism. In Christianity, you have a book. This book is supposed to define all you need to know about God and the universe and the world. Anybody else who disagrees with this book is just plain wrong. They're all sinners, and they're all going to hell, let's say, if you believe that. I believe that that is probably one of the most damaging belief systems a person could have. And I've stewed on this for many years, trying to understand what part of it bothers me the most. And I guess what it is the fact that if you have to use fear of something we can't even see or know, in order to get people to fall in line, it's missing the whole point. Because this life that we live right now, there's more than enough fear. There's more than enough pain and suffering all around us. The question is, how much of it can we tolerate, and how much of it can we turn around and use that mental alchemy to make it a positive? Finding the silver lining applies to every situation. And this is something that I learned maybe in my early 30s that I really started to process, especially after listening to a lot of Manly P. Hall and Alan Watts, and just being able to say, okay, bad shit's going to happen. I'm going to have to accept it. You don't have to like it, but you can learn to love it. The term amor fati, love your fate, is something that always comes to mind. And the other one is memento mori, remember you will die. And I believe conquering my fear of death, which is an ongoing process in all of us, it would be completely dishonest for me to sit here and say, I have absolutely no fear of mortality. But I have much less of a fear of my own mortality and much more in losing those around me that I love. Because the most pain, the most suffering that we have in life is from losing people, losing those that we love and revere. Even losing people we look up to that we've never met. You know, a famous actor or your favorite musician. I remember crying when I heard Jerry Garcia died in '95. And I thought, this is interesting. You know, I've only been listening to these guys a few years, but knowing the impact that that man had on so many was enough to shed a tear about. I'm very in touch with my emotions, so I'm able to cry if I need to, but at the same time, I don't find myself becoming too sad when people pass away. It just is their time, and it is what it is. It's different with kids, of course, and this is more nuanced discussion than I can fit into this video. But conquering that fear of death, I think, is our first step towards truly embracing life. You have to sweep that under the rug, get it out of the way. And the reason I bring up mortality is because it is the basis for all religion. Trying to understand our purpose, trying to understand what we should do with the time that we have here. And there are folks who settle into a belief system and never change it. There are folks who have a belief system for decades and then overnight change to another one. It's a lot like politics. When I hear people say, oh, I used to be on the left or I used to be on the right, but now I've moved to the other side. I say, no. You're completely missing the point. The goal is to move into being a free thinker, an independent thinker. And it's honestly one of the most painful things that we endure as humans, is to have our own opinions. And I say that because I have the experience of knowing how painful it is to agree with, say, conservatives and, liberals, to agree with Christians on something and Buddhists on others, to agree with what you would consider to be opposing forces, while recognizing that those forces are not opposing at all, that polarity is life, that we have spent way too long trying to prove what we believe is right and all the others are wrong, but also the idea that everybody should think one certain way. In the 20th century, because it's the 21st century, we have so many people who believe that they have the truth and that everyone else is wrong. And because of that, we look down on each other. And it's taken me a long time to not just think of Christians as dumb, or maybe not dumb, but, ignorant or unaware of the bigger picture. The same way that I felt about conservatives. And trying to understand people and their beliefs has helped me immensely to break out of the bubble that I put myself in for so long. And I've always been open-minded. I've always been a free thinker. But there's that part of me that hadn't considered certain things, certain aspects. The one who would, insult an idea without even looking into it. I've always tried to really hard not to do that. To try to say, okay, if enough people have an idea, maybe there's something to it. But as for God, this word has been so tainted that it's difficult for people to use. And this is unfortunate, because a lot more people believe in a higher power than you would think by looking at statistics. Even folks who say that they're agnostic or atheist or whatever it might be, non-believers, a lot of them do believe in something, but they just cannot define it, so they refuse to say, I believe in anything, because I'm not sure. I would fit into that camp as well. But I do believe that humans are connected on a level that we just cannot comprehend yet. And we may be able to, or may never be able to. But as new science discovers that brain waves, can be read by devices outside of the body, since we know that our brains are susceptible to, picking up on things that we're not aware of, it leads to this very confusing mess of truths and half-truths, and us trying to put labels on things. And this is why the spiritual community, or the New Age community, has bothered me for so long. That I enjoy crystals. I enjoy meditation and incense. I say various prayers. I speak to the universe. I hug trees. I'm damn hippie, right? But I would never tell somebody, oh, this is your star chart and this is what's important. It's the same thing. Do I believe in, say, astrology? Not as it's proposed in modern day. Do I believe our ancestors may have spent a long time trying to understand the universe and therefore placed symbols and ideas on certain months, times, and cycles of the moon? Of course. Maybe they even had some truth to it. But the idea that you can read a Sunday horoscope or go get your palm read, to me, is just absurd. Because I don't believe most of these people, even if they're in touch with something deeper, I don't believe that they can properly harness and understand that energy. Now, the same goes for any guru. There may be many wise men out there, many wise women, and people that you might go to and say, can you direct me to truth, to God? And this is why I mentioned Zen, because the Zen master will bounce it back at you and say, you figure it out. You already know the answer. This doesn't fly for a lot of people. It's very confusing, because we believe others have the truth and that they can tell us these things. But the minute you let go of that, when it comes to the bigger things like belief systems and politics and how a country should be run, how the world should be run, when you think about it on a level of neutrality, say, if I abandon my preconceived notions about how the world operates, what would I do in this situation to improve things? You start to find that you're nudged in the right direction by forces you can't understand. It's almost like when people say you just have to pray to God or pray to Jesus. Asking it in any form, Krishna, Buddha, whatever it may be, the names don't matter. It never mattered. Except for to us as individuals, to be able to put a label on something that helps us remember for our mantras. Because ultimately the voice is one of our most important assets. Being able to speak to each other and to ourselves in our heads, to the universe. We could only think in concepts at one time. As soon as we had language, we could start thinking in words. We could write these words down. We could transmute these ideas into actual action. And this is how we got to where we're at. This is how we made so many discoveries over the centuries. And boom, the Industrial Revolution. And boom, the digital revolution. And now we're in a time where many people have lost faith, not just in their beliefs, but faith in humanity. Faith that we can ever get out of this mess that we've gotten into. But all you have to do is just change one thing. The way you perceive things. As I said, getting rid of those preconceived notions, it can be very difficult. But once we've done it, if we can start with a blank slate and really consider what is the best course of action for myself, for those around me, and what really matters, we'll find some very simple answers which are universal. One of them, and the main one, is that you have to love yourself for who you are. But that also includes a little disclaimer. Don't let it go to your head, and don't believe you're better than anyone else. As I mentioned with the spiritual community, this is one of the issues I have, is people are constantly talking about self-help, self-improvement, working on yourself. All of that is important, very important to understand yourself. But just don't ever let it get to the point where you say, I have the truth, and you don't. Because that's bullshit. We have to figure it out for ourselves and find our own label, our own version of the ineffable. The things that we can't express or explain. And one of those is that higher power, that force that you may call whatever you choose. I've always been partial to the idea of Christ consciousness because it really does resonate with people, say, in the world's largest faith, which if you don't have those people on board, you're never going to accomplish anything. So the idea is to create a belief system that's inclusive to all people. And this is difficult because there are some profane and ignorant fools out there. But everyone is born good. At least that's my belief. It's the world that we grow up in that creates the havoc that allows us to become horrible people. Just about anybody who harms another person or it disadvantages others, takes advantage of them, steals, lies, cheats. All these things come from issues within that we need to resolve within our childhood or our upbringing. But the idea that we need to focus on our past trauma to become better people is generally blown out of proportion. You need to get over it. Okay, so your parents weren't there for you. Deal with it. Find parents as an adult, people you can look up to. In other words, as long as we're hanging on to blame and blaming other people from the past for things that we do now, we're missing a very important component of being human, which is learning. Education, learning, and experiencing the world, and being able to assimilate that into a nice little ball of information that helps us lead better lives. And each day we should wake up with a little more understanding and take the time to try to understand each other in the world. And I honestly believe, at least in my experience, these things have improved my psyche and my way of being so much, so immensely, that often I want to share them, but I can't define them. I mentioned a lot about mental alchemy, and these are some of the things that have really helped me process the world. Not just say everything happens for a reason. It's not about determinism, and I don't want to get hung up on the argument of free will and determinism, but yes, free will is a real thing for a very simple reason. If everything was predetermined, in the sense that many think of, in the sense of the term that many people believe, they say that, well, everything's going to happen anyway. It is what it is. The idea that the universe would be created or create itself and be self-aware of everything that's going to happen in the future makes absolutely no sense. In any mental gymnastics you can do, don't begin to explain how everything could be pre-planned or predetermined when it is all there is. It's difficult to explain. It's even like the idea of the Big Bang, what came before that. Okay, if God was here to create the universe, what came before God? What is time? What is evolution? Is evolution the process of creation? And is creation the process of evolution? We don't understand these things, but we can grasp some of these, the logos, the word, trying to understand how we arrived here. We'll never fully grasp it. But what we can do is take all the historical knowledge that we have in our own lives and others and try to create something better from that. And yes, we are smarter than our ancestors. We're smarter than people from the past for one simple reason. We have more information to draw from. We can see failures before they happen. How many people around the world made the same mistake over and over, mixing the wrong compounds, trying to do a scientific process when somebody's already done that thousands of miles away? You would never know. But now, with the click of a button, we have access to everything, to a fault. It's overwhelming, and it leads us to believe that in our little bubble, if we think we know what's going on with the world. And there's always going to be somebody who's going to back that up and say, yeah, this is the only way. Understanding God, to me, is understanding ourselves. And the more we understand ourselves, the more we understand creation. And we can start to answer some of the simpler questions. But still, there are those nagging questions that we cannot seem to answer. Who are we? Why are we here? What should we be doing? And I think that if we listen to our hearts, we can find these things out. We may get the answers internally, but if we never ask the question, we'll always be confused. My connection with the Great Spirit, God, whatever you call it, it's unique to me in my life. And when I meet somebody else who has their own beliefs, I will explore these ideas with them. But I don't berate them for believing how they believe. You have to find your own version of truth. It doesn't have to resonate with everyone else. It just has to be non-damaging to other people. And these are some of those simple rules, as I was mentioning, the basics we do know in life. One is don't harm other people unnecessarily. You may have to defend yourself. You may even have to protect your assets or your family, or, you may even have to protect your values. But we really have to know when we're stepping in shit, making bigger mistakes for ourselves, because 90% of the problems we face in life are ones we created. I've heard this said, but it's just proven itself to be true time and time again. Watching myself, watching others, the things that we stress about are usually self-inflicted. And this leads me to believe that the world isn't just a scary place where everybody's suffering, but rather the world's a beautiful place where many people create their own suffering and are just afraid of things that they don't understand. And when we don't have knowledge about the future, it leads us to be very confused in the present and hanging on to the past to try to understand where we're at, because nobody wants to be floating alone in the ocean. But if you have family and friends, connections, that's the first step. First, understanding yourself as best you can, then bouncing these ideas off of other people that love you, so you can get an honest assessment if you're doing things correctly, at least to the degree where you're not harming others. Because I have many faults, and in my past, it's not the things I've done that have caused me problems. It's almost always the things I haven't done. So it's not like I lose control and I go harm people or drive drunk or make a stupid decision. It's that I should be doing something, like filing taxes or getting my car fixed, things like that, and I don't. I live with that, and that's okay. I'm a procrastinator, and it's part of my personality. I can improve upon this, of course, but by understanding myself, it helps me understand other people. What are their desires? What are our desires to understand each other? And how can we live in a world where people have faith faith, the correct kind of faith, not a blind belief in something that you have no idea about, but really convinced, having knowledge. Even the knowledge we have is often skewed. So the best we can do is make assumptions and assessments on what we do know. And the more we know, sometimes the better off we are. Sometimes the less we know, the better off we are when it comes to world issues today. This is why I don't pay attention to any media anymore that has to do with individual people. It might be interesting for a while, or I might want to learn about a person, but when it comes to politics and people and he said, she said, I just don't click on it. I don't look at it. I'm not interested. And even if I am, I make it a point not to clog up my mind with that, I was going to say, I don't want to use the term because then YouTube, of course, will censor it, but, mental jacking it, it's navel gazing often, and it's not about abandoning the ego. It's not about becoming a servant of some higher power and just ignoring all of these worldly issues that we have, and especially not abandoning entire groups of people, whether it's your neighbor or your friend or another country altogether. I had heard someone put it pretty well about why we need to care about all countries and all people. Say the world is an organism. The world is a body. All the humans on this, of course, are like cells. And I've always thought about this, but he was talking about how different countries are like the organs of the planet. You say organs need to protect themselves. If it's the heart, it's not going to want a bunch of liver cells invading. However, you still need the liver. And this was coming down to discussing things like immigration and how to protect your own country while still caring about other people, and how difficult it is because there's two lines of thinking. Either, everybody deserves a chance to immigrate, or nobody should come to the country because it's full. These are both totally, not well thought out positions. The whole world is always in motion. It's about, just like a body, having those immune cells and knowing how much any organ can tolerate, because if one organ fails, especially the heart, all the rest of them fail along with it. This is not saying that the U.S. is, the leader of the world, and that if we fail, all countries are going to fail and die. Of course not. But we are looked upon as a bastion of free speech and truth, and that's really going by the wayside these days, as this, this idea of, coerced speech takes hold, which many people think is just okay and hunky-dory. I've never seen so many people who believe that free speech should be looked at again. The First Amendment is non-negotiable. And what it comes down to is people not wanting to hear ideas that they don't like. And that, to me, is a scary proposition. We don't have to listen. But the idea that we want to stop somebody else from saying what they have to say to their own group, there are limits. Certain things you don't say in a workplace, certain things you don't say in court. There's places where you have to respect the rule of law because it keeps order. And I respect that. But shutting people down for their viewpoints on things, it's become the norm. And people aren't pushing back against it. They're tolerant to it. But this idea that the whole world's dying and falling apart just because of the modern era and the way we're going about things is ludicrous. Humans are very tenacious and will continue to flourish and survive as long as we can. We are just one major solar flare or one asteroid impact away from devastation. But that doesn't strip away the heart and the mind of the few who remain, who can carry on that knowledge that we do have. And I'm not talking about technology, computers, spaceships. I'm talking about what's in the heart, the truths that we've found. And the fact that even in the modern day, humans are still, really striving for some sort of a connection to the universe and a connection to truth internally, shows us that it's within our nature to seek that higher power and understand it. So don't be ashamed